Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Align podcast. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ruhi, and I strive to use this podcast as a platform for conversations that ignite new ideas and foster personal growth. Today's episode is one I have been really looking forward to because we are going to talk about something that comes up a lot, especially in the conversations around relationships, self worth, and societal expectations. And yes, your guess is right. It's about the idea of not settling. And I have got someone truly special with me, Lena Ehrenberg. She's a life coach, a TEDx speaker, and an actor. She's all about helping women invite more love into their lives, whether that's in relationships, parenting, or just learning to love themselves a bit more. Someone who is very passionate about making a difference. And what I love about her is that she believes that even the smallest choices we make can have big impact. So, whether you're navigating love, career decisions, or just trying to stay true to yourself in a world full of noise, trust me, this episode is for you. Lina, thank you so much for being here, and it's such a pleasure to have you on my show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ruhi. I really appreciate being here.
All right, let's get started with the conversation today. We hear the phrase don't settle a lot these days, and especially in the context of relationships. But I believe that it means different things to different people, and sometimes it's definitely misunderstood. I would love to hear from you. What does not settling really mean to you on a personal level?
Wow. Okay, now I have to take a pause because that's a really, really excellent question. I guess I really never thought about not settling meaning different things to different people because I think I've always had my interpretation of it, right? And I think it's human nature to think that other people think the way we do. And having said that, I realize I think that's a big part of it. That for me, not settling means that I would rather be fully in the relationship that I have with myself solo and be steeped in my own values and my own sense of what's right and my own desires of how to live a good life for myself than to give that up to be in a relationship with someone who's really not a well-aligned match and a well-aligned partner for me. That to me would be settling because I would be giving in more to societal expectations than I would be living fully and honestly for myself.
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I really like the way how you said that it's not about being picky. In fact, it's about knowing what really feels right for you and not lowering your standards just to fit in. So thanks for sharing that.
Yes, and I want to just really I just want to expand on that if we could a second because I
Sure.
just think it's such an excellent question to start out with. Settling is not attached to another person.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot about dating that is very much focused on the other person or who are you looking for?
Yeah.
Or if you're with someone, your friends might look at someone and think, well, you know, they're not right for you. They're not up to your standards or something. Why would you be settling? And the focus is very much on that other person. But like you've really made me think about this and want to offer to your listeners that this is so important that you can have whatever kind of relationship you want in your life. And if there are values that you have and desires that you have, you can have all of those things that you want in your life and you can have them with a partner or perhaps you can also have them with yourself.
I think that's a lovely perspective that you gave, and I'm pretty sure our listeners would definitely give it a thought. Society often sets these invisible timelines, and I totally agree with that, especially when it comes to relationships. And there is this unspoken pressure to settle down or pair up by certain age as if it's the ultimate marker of fulfillment or success. If I may ask you, did you ever feel that pressure? And if so, what helped you tune out that noise and stay true to yourself?
Younger, I used to be asked pretty frequently, why aren't you married? And it was interesting because all different types of people would ask me that, but based on the tone in their voice is how I would take it in or not. And sometimes I would believe that they were making something mean something negative about me. Like I should have been married. And if I wasn't, then what's wrong with you? Is basically what I was hearing some people say. And it's so interesting though, because there were times also, and this used to happen, I will say with older men. And when I say older,
Mm-hmm.
like father, grandfather kind of age to me at the time in my 20s or 30s,
Mm-hmm.
who would say, well, why aren't you married? You're so pretty. And then I started to really think about it. What does that have to do with anything? Right? As if there were certain men who thought that if a woman was pretty, then what? And so in that way, I felt like I went through a period of time where I was feeling the societal expectations because I was literally hearing this question from people. And I did want to be married at that time. And I wasn't dating people. I was having relationships. But when I really looked at the relationships I was having, I knew that I wasn't really happy. Those
Mm-hmm.
were not good relationships for me. And so I would not have taken any of them to the next step because it wouldn't have lasted as a marriage and it wouldn't have been a good partnership. And so I eventually, when I started to really want to figure more out about myself and make
Mm-hmm.
changes for myself in my life, it got to a point where I really wanted to have better relationships. I wanted to have better communication with people. I wanted to really be able to make lovely connections with people, men and women, romantic relationships and friendships. But I wanted my business communication to be better. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to have better conversations with my family members. I just knew that overall, I wanted to make a change. And so I started to really think. And the question that came to me to ask myself was, if you really want to be married, then why aren't you dating people you want to be married to? And that question had never occurred to me. I just kept going out in the world and just meeting people. And if they were interested in me, I would date them. And that's where this whole shift started to come for me. How am I approaching dating? How am I presenting myself? What part of me am I bringing to this versus what am I just taking in and accepting from other people and their interests? And that broke everything open.
I think so many people feel that same pressure, what you call out, but don't always talk about it. So, what you said about trusting your own path, even when it didn't look like everyone else's, it's such an important reminder. So, thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Some people equate being single with being alone. I know it's quite cliche, but those aren't the same. How do you differentiate between, if I have to say, solitude and loneliness in one's life?
Well, there's a big conversation, I'm sure that in the world right now about loneliness.
Yeah.
And so you used a few different words. And so we could just really talk about that. It's a really pertinent question. And I think it's important. To me, there's a big difference between being alone and being lonely. I love being alone. I have a million things to occupy my time. I love thinking, though. I love being quiet and I love having time to think or to read or to listen to podcasts or to learn, take things in. So, and to me, those are things that I can do while I'm alone. But for a lot of people who don't necessarily like being alone and they love being social and they love having people around and being around people, I can understand that for them, being alone can feel lonely. And for a lot of people who feel lonely,
Mm-hmm.
that's what it's about. How comfortable are they? But also, it's so much about how we feel because we could be in a big crowd of people
Yeah,
and feel lonely. So
absolutely.
that's really about how are we making our connections. The other question you asked, though, about being single,
Mm-hmm.
is that to me is just my marital state or my lack of a marital state, right? To me, I'm single because that's how society defines someone who's not married. But that doesn't affect how I feel about myself and my relationship with myself or whether I like my alone time or not. That's totally just how I'm identified in the world.
If I have to say, I'm someone who really loves my own company. As you called out, that, when you're alone all by yourself, it's time for you to think so many things that you can do. It's about reinventing yourself, figuring out what are you passionate about, what are you good at, what is something that you can improvise in your life. So there is so much that you can do, and definitely I would say there is so much strength in being comfortable within your own company. And I loved it the way you said it about the distinction. And our listeners, I'm pretty sure many of them will really connect with what you said just now.
Thank you.
Now, there is this common misconception that being single automatically means being lonely. I know it's quite follow-up question for what we spoke just now. Like if you're in a relationship, if you're not in a relationship, sorry, it means that something is missing. How do you personally differentiate between being alone and, feeling lonely? I know this is uh, more connected to the previous question that I asked.
Well, yeah, it is. But I also want to pick up on what you just said that there's something missing. I have a very firm conviction that each one of us, is a whole, complete being. And so again, I would think that it is more a societal expectation to suggest that there's something missing. There absolutely are things that we may want and desire in our lives, and to feel fulfilled and to feel that our lives can be enriched in some way. That's what I think a relationship ought to do. I just so believe that a relationship can enrich the lives that we already have, but that for each one of us, we are already whole and complete, and there's nothing missing.
Yeah, exactly. I totally believe that, being alone doesn't have to mean that something is really missing. For me, it's actually to be really full and meaningful time in life. And it's so important to hear that perspective, especially with all the assumptions that people tend to have in current times. Choosing not to settle, whether in relationships, career, or life. I'm pretty sure it can be incredibly empowering, but it does come with a lot of pros and cons, what you call. There are moments when doubts really creep in, especially when things don't go as we plan. Or, when we are surrounded by people making different choices. Have there been times when you question your decision?
There have been times that I questioned myself. And I think that's the trap that we can fall into. Like I mentioned earlier about, people saying to me, why aren't you married? And as I realized later, I wasn't conscious of it at the time when they were asking me that. But as I realized later, I didn't doubt my choice because I knew that my choice was ultimately for the better. I knew that if I had married any of the people who I thought at the time were serious contenders,
Mm-hmm.
we weren't good fits, and we would have been divorced, or I would be in a very unhappy relationship for myself if I was still with that person. But so I haven't ultimately questioned my choice, but that's something I've only seen after distance was put between me and that moment. But like
Mm-hmm.
I said, I think that so much of what you're describing and so much of the struggle that we have is within ourselves, and that we can wind up questioning ourselves. And a lot of people, you mentioned earlier that, you're being picky if you are looking for too many things or too many specific things. There's a huge difference between being selective and being picky. There's a huge difference between knowing yourself and having love for yourself and having the standards for yourself to want to be with a good partner, and a partner who you together can have a loving, respectful relationship. That's not being picky. And there's different ways that you can figure that out. So here's an example that I've experienced with some of my clients. Sometimes people will decide that they want to be married to someone who they feel is has status, right? And so to
Mm-hmm.
them, perhaps that means I'd like to be married to, I think I want to be married to a doctor, or I want to, let's just take that example because I have had clients who had many doctors in the family,
Mm-hmm.
and that was how they were raised to believe that they would probably someday marry a doctor. But when we started to talk about it, and part of what I always do with all of my clients before they begin the dating process is to really dig deep into themselves and learn their values and learn the way they want to live their lives. What lifestyle would they like to have? And so many of my clients do because they are older than perhaps it used to be. People used to very often get married in their 20s, right? And now people are waiting well into their 30s, late 30s even. And so these women have all had, they're having their own careers, they have their friendships, they have their social interactions,
Mm-hmm.
and they know that they want a partner to be there with them. They want a partner who's going to be with them through all of these things that they're doing in life. So when we start to talk about it, they may think, oh, I'm going to marry a doctor. That's what my family, it's how I was raised. Okay. But doctors, depending on what kind of medicine they're practicing, they're on call
Mm-hmm.
very often, right? Late nights, all weekend, at least a couple of weekends a month, depending on the practice, the size of the practice, right? So when we dig into it, we may discover that the person who represented who they thought they were going to marry is not the real person who they're going to have the actual
Yeah.
living, breathing relationship with.
Yeah.
And that's when we get into understanding how to choose.
If I have to say something, firstly, thank you so much for being so real about it. And I think a lot of people will find comfort in knowing that even strong decisions come with moments of doubt.
Yes.
So thanks for that. And I believe that staying true to yourself isn't about never questioning things. I strongly feel it's about choosing to keep going even when it is hard. How sometimes people say maybe your standards are too high. It can come off like they are telling you to just settle or lower the bar. What do you have to say, and how do you usually respond to that?
Well, I would say that, here's a really good opportunity, depending who the person is. If this is
Mm-hmm.
someone you're in a relationship with, if it's a friend, if it's someone you trust, I would ask them because there might be good information coming to you with someone that you trust, right? Not just with anybody. But if you have a really good friend who's known you for a long time and you have advice from that friend before that you can trust, I would say, okay, let's talk about this. How do you think that I'm being picky? Or how do you think that my standards are too high? What is it that you see in me? Because this is why I'm looking for what I'm looking for. This is what I'm thinking about. And it goes and it could wind up being that conversation about there are other things obviously that we're looking for in a partner than simply what their status is, what their position is.
Yeah.
And so I would say that also part of the process is understanding exactly what your core values are, but then also figuring out who's a good complement. What partner
Mm-hmm.
has the qualities that best complement your values and your qualities. And my clients and we get down to 5. And I know that people have many more than that. But if you can start with your 5 core values for yourself
Mm-hmm.
and then figure out the qualities in a partner that would best complement those 5, that's when you start looking for while you're dating, finding the people who are a good match for that. And then maybe if you've found someone who really matches all 5 of those values and qualities for you, but you're still saying, "Oh, but I thought he was going to have this kind of career and he doesn't. He does something totally different."
Hmm.
That's when I would be open that maybe, if that's what your friends are talking about, then that's when you ought to be really open to, am I really being picky at this point? Am I making a big standard out of something that ultimately doesn't affect how we're going to live together? That's really the question.
I'm quite curious to know, you said that at least they should pick 5 core values. In your experience, did you notice that people actually take that effort to do, or they realize it at later point of time that they should have looked into the core values?
I think that people aren't conscious of that for themselves at the beginning. I think we all know ourselves, or many of us do. So many of us, so many women, especially in this day and age, have really learned so much about ourselves and done the work to really understand ourselves and know our values. I think a lot of people don't put it front and center when they start out dating is
Yeah.
the thing. And that's the difference between working with a coach, because when you're being set up for success, you have all of these things put in front of you to be able to understand and to think about and to lead with when you start meeting people.
I'm pretty sure your words will definitely inspire the listeners to stand by what matters to them. So many people focus on waiting for the right person, but there is so much power in becoming the right person for yourself first. What are your thoughts on that?
I think absolutely you have to be the right person for yourself first and foremost. And there's a there's a phrase that I don't know if you've heard this, but it has there's a phrase that has been around for a very long time, which is, you have to love yourself before you can find someone to love. And I'm still hearing that. And there's a lot of pushback to that. And I can understand the pushback because I think that it's a little backwards. In my experience, what I've learned from myself personally and from talking to so many different women is that I firmly believe we have to love ourselves before we can allow someone else to love us. And what I mean by that is, and there are some people who are going to be listening to this who aren't going to understand this concept at all, because you love yourself and you have a good relationship with yourself and you have a good friendship with yourself and you like yourself. There are some of us, and women and men, who really struggle loving ourselves and really struggle finding our self-worth and finding value in ourselves. There's a lot of doubt and a lot of second guessing ourselves. And so what that means is that when someone then comes in contact with someone else who loves them and tries to tell them that you're so beautiful, you're brilliant, I love what you do, I love you. And that person who's hearing it, if they don't find that same value in themselves, they're thinking, why? What do you want? How can you say that? What are you looking for? Right? It's so imbalanced. And
Yeah.
so that's why I really have come to believe that the fuller and richer the relationship that we have with ourselves will translate into fuller and richer relationships that we can have with other people, because we can let other people in and we can accept them and believe them.
If I have to put it in simple way, what you said just now is, it's not about waiting for someone to complete you, but about becoming the whole on your own.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
Okay. Can you share a time when you walked away from a relationship or opportunity that really didn't feel right?
Yeah, let me think about that for a second. Yes, I was in my 20s and I had been introduced to someone through a business associate.
Hmm.
And I don't know how good friends they were, But as I said, I didn't know this person very well who had introduced us because it was just someone I worked with occasionally. So we were introduced, and I went out with this person a few times, and we were having a great time. And I thought that everything was great, and I really liked him. And I thought, oh, he likes me too. And then he called me one day. We were supposed to have a date.
Mm-hmm.
It was I remember this so distinctly. I remember where I was, and I remember he called me and he said, "I'm canceling our date tonight." And I said, "Can you tell me why?" It would just seem so abrupt and so weird. And he said, "Well, I've just heard something about you that I'm really not pleased about. And this just needs to end." And I said, "What could you tell me? What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, this person," he said, "he told me something that I'm really not pleased about. And if that's how you conduct yourself, well, then you're not someone I want to be with." And he hung up. And I was so shocked. And I called that person who had introduced us.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "What happened? I just got a phone call and it seems you're in the middle of this. What is this about?" And he said, "Oh my gosh, I made a joke. I made a joke. I was telling him I made a joke about you. And I told him that you and I had gone out last night. And this person was married
Mm-hmm.
who told him that. The person in the middle was married who told him that." And I said, "Okay, first of all, I don't find that at all funny, but you thought it was funny to tell this person who you introduced me to that you and I had a date? That's totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable." And I said, "You need to straighten this out." And about an hour later, I did get a phone call from that man who I'd gone
Mm-hmm.
out with. And he said, "Well, I got a phone call," and he explained, and he said that he was joking. And I had had an hour to think about it at that point and said, "Okay, well, I accept your apology. And yet I don't think that I can continue in this relationship because for you to so immediately believe something about me
Yeah.
that is so opposed to my nature, that means that in this entire amount of time that we've been dating, and it was quite a few weeks at that point, you haven't taken me in at all. You don't know anything about who I am for you to just take what someone else says at face value." And so that's something that I think is really important to think about. How much are you really taking in about people who you are dating? How much are you really learning about them and who they are? And how much are they taking in about you and really learning who you are?
Firstly, thank you for sharing that. And I think experiences like this really help you to take decisions, or rather, wise decisions. And listening to you makes me believe that at times letting go can actually open the door to something better.
Absolutely.
What would you say to someone who is feeling pressured by family or friends or society for that matter to settle down or find someone even if they are not ready?
Yeah, that is really hard, and do have such great respect for people who are in that situation because that's very, especially, all cultures are so different. And so if you are living in a culture where there is much greater pressure on you than in other cultures, that's very different. What I want to offer is, if you know yourself
Mm-hmm.
and you know that you're not ready, then that's where you go to for your well of strength. And you have to know what you see. Like I said for myself, I knew that it would not be a good, healthy relationship. The couple of people I thought that I could have married
Mm-hmm.
in my 20s and 30s, when I really thought about it, I knew that it wouldn't be healthy. If you know that you're really not ready and you're not going to be able to enter into a really good, solid, living partnership, then you just have to be strong and put yourself first. And hopefully you have people around you that you can talk to about that and maybe help them at least understand. That can be a big support to you. They might not still like it. They might still think that it's very strange and very wrong that you're not ready yet. But if you can at least open up the communication and try to help them understand, then maybe they can become allies for you and at least be more open to saying, okay, well, when will you be ready? Maybe you could take it in increments. Maybe they won't say, oh, woohoo, okay, you can wait forever. I'm fine with that. But maybe at least with understanding, they can start to come to your side.
So you're suggesting that dialogue always helps?
Communication. Communication always helps. Yes.
And it's so refreshing to hear that, it's totally okay to move at your own pace and that staying true to yourself matters way more important than trying to meet someone else's expectations or the timelines that they define. Now, I know we have had quite a few questions. Let's add a little fun to this conversation before we wrap up. I have got quick rapid fire questions for you. And all you have to do is just say the first thing that comes to your mind.
Okay.
What's something people would be surprised to learn about you?
That I love to make babies laugh. That's my superpower. My superpower is making babies laugh.
What's your go-to comfort food?
Comfort food, did you
Yeah.
say?
Yeah.
Ice cream. Ice
That's
cream's
not
a food.
Yeah. And if you had a superpower for a day, what would it be?
Okay, a real superpower other than making babies laugh.
Yeah.
If I had a superpower for a day,
Mm-hmm.
it would be to be able to be anywhere I want to, like teleport or transport, be anywhere. I would love to be able to see the entire world in a day.
That's fantastic. I have something similar. So if I get an opportunity, something like that, I would want a superpower where I can become anything. I can become a door. I can become a human. I can become an animal. I can become aircraft, anything, whatever I want. And I
Wow.
want to be wherever I can just imagine. So that's something that I always fantasize about.
Oh my gosh, I think I want yours. That's really cool. Okay.
Okay, one book or movie that really changed the way you see the world.
Okay. So now I'm having a struggle. I have two in my head right now. I'm going to say it's a book called Women in Sunlight,
Mm-hmm.
and it's by Frances Mays. And Frances Mays wrote the books about Tuscany, year in Tuscany, and her life under the Tuscan sun. She's the author of that. But her novel, Women in Sunlight, was such a beautiful expression of women in their later years who still have so much life to live. Talk about not giving in to expectations. Every single one of them was expected to have a certain type of retirement in her old age. And they all come together, and through the power of friendship and women bonding together, their lives were just so full and beautiful. And I love it. I've read it 4 times and I'll keep reading it over and over. And it just gave me so much hope for the future. And it also helped inform what I know to be true, which is we have to be true to ourselves and not just give in to what society thinks should be right for some general person, because none of us is general. We're all specific and unique.
I would definitely want to read that book. So let me connect with you after this podcast and get more
Definitely.
details. It's quite inspiring. And last question for you is, what's one quote that you live by?
What's coming to me to say is a code that I will be very honest, I'm still learning,
Mm-hmm.
which is just because someone doesn't like something that you said or did
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that what you said or did was wrong.
That's so powerful. I think you did pretty well in the rapid fire round. And in fact, I was quite impressed with the way you answered all the questions. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up, where can our listeners find more about you and learn more about your work?
Well, my website is lenaehrenberg.com. I'll spell that LenaEhrenberg.com. And if you do go to my website, and if you are a woman who wants to learn more about how to choose the partner who you want to, if you want to make better choices for your dating, you'll find a guide there that you can get, especially if you're interested in marriage, but even if you're not interested in marriage, because even if you want to just learn how to date better and have more fun dating. And then the other way people can reach me is I love to have people DM me on Instagram at Have More Love.
Thank you so much. I'll definitely mention all these details in the show notes so that it's easier for everyone to find you.
Thank you.
And that's the wrap for today's episode. Trust me, this was so much fun. I thoroughly enjoyed having you on my show, the conversation and everything that you shared. So thank you so much for being here and keeping this conversation so real.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ruhi.
And to everyone listening, thanks for tuning in. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about, whether you're single or in relationship or just trying to figure out your own path. And if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review and share it with someone who might need it to hear today. Until next time, take very good care of yourself, trust your timing, and as Lena said, keep showing up for you. Goodbye. Thank you, Lena.
Thank you.